Okay, let's do another episode of Raw Reflection where I, Keaton Wyndham, a Southern conservative Christian, am going through a liberal, like more woke graduate program in the northern United States where I'm trying to get a master's in sexual health with an emphasis in sex therapy. And so I should have made this video a long time ago. I started my second class, but the spring semester is absolutely crazy. So I had no doubt that I would get behind. But let me tell you a little bit about the class. Um, it was called Impacts of Law, Policy, and Government Regulation on Human Sexuality, and that is a huge mouthful. So I normally just refer to it as my law and policy class, so much so that I actually forgot the name of it and I had to look it up in order to make this video. Um, and so I I was so torn on like whether or not I was going to like this class or not. Um, we had to make an intro video just like for the last class where we like introduced ourselves to the professor and our classmates and stuff like that. And about at least half of the classmates from the first class were in the second class. So it was nice to see those familiar faces and those relationships that I had cultivated got to continue. But in my intro video, I shared with the professor that I like almost went to law school. Like I applied for law schools. I took the LSAT a couple times. I was literally about to go, had toured campuses, made my selection, and then I was like, I'm not fulfilled by this. This is something that people have always told me they thought that I was going to go do. They always told me my whole life, like, you should be a lawyer. You're so good at arguing. And I don't actually love law. So I'm glad I didn't make that choice. That would have been a very messy, like, mistake. I don't know if I would have even ended up graduating. Um, but I do like to know the rules so that I can like work within them to my advantage. And so, still, I was thinking, oh, I enjoy like law enforcement and knowing the laws and like how they can be interpreted. Um, and especially like if they're going to be related to like sex and sexual health, I thought, oh, this won't be that bad. And I have so far have gone back and forth, like depending on the day or the week, I have changed how I felt about this class. Um, so in week one, we had the intro video, and the professor is like this very smart, very sharp, like intense woman. She is a practicing attorney, and she specifically works with like national organizations and companies and different things that work with gender affirming care or like feminist issues and things like that. So she is whip smart and she has her finger on the pulse of law and how it connects to like gender and sexual laws. So I really have benefited from her knowledge, and I have enjoyed getting to speak with her and hearing her thoughts. Um, One of the like we jumped in with both feet right off the bat. Like I was very overwhelmed week one because I was like, I don't even know what this class is about. Like, and you're already wanting me to like give my thoughts about our final project, which what that was the first assignment was brainstorm three topics for the final project. And I was like, I don't even fully grasp like what law and policy is, and so you want me to figure that out, pick an area, and plan for the end already. It had me scrambling a little bit. Um, And that's what week one was about, was literally answering the question, what is public policy? And she gave us some links to look at. We watched a lecture. Um, she gave us some policy toolkits, which we had to discuss in our discussion board. Um, but so for the brainstorming assignment, I had to submit 3 topics, and the topics that I knew that I was most familiar with that would probably be tied to laws and policies were doing a final project about laws and policies concerning either sex education in evangelical spaces, like speaking to churches and like Christian communities about educating people on sex. Um, the second topic was sex education improvement in schools, because, I mean, schools are trying to do everything but provide sex education. They're trying to find all these loopholes and do just enough to not anger parents and foundations and organizations, but also adhere to the guidelines that have been given by the state, which in the South, in Texas, where I'm from, like, that is such a delicate dance. So I don't necessarily blame schools, because they don't know the best way to go about it. They have bigger fish to fry, but it definitely leaves a lot to be desired. And then the third topic that I submitted for brainstorming, and I just kind of tossed it on because I was like, shoot, I have to have 3. Those are really the only 2 things I care about. So I kind of just made like a subpoint, if that makes sense. Because I feel like it really reads more like 2A and 2B. But sex education for kids and teens with special needs. More than just the typical sex education curriculum that a gen ed student would need, a teen or a younger student in life skills needs to be taught in a different format. They probably need to be taught different concepts and different social rules that gen ed kids might be able to pick up in a less obvious, unspoken, social context, whereas kids in life skills need to be explicitly told, you can do this, you can't do this, and here are the reasons why. And if you do this, here is the best, safest way to do it. And so we really just kind of had to bullet point a couple things and throw in some links from places that are already attempting to speak to that issue or address it. But I mean, I really felt like for that assignment, I was kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall and just seeing what stuck. Because I didn't have a good grasp of the class yet. So I didn't feel confident turning in work, and I prefer to feel really great about products that I turn in. I would rather turn in something late and it be a piece of work that I feel like I could fully defend, rather than some thrown together half thought out junk. Because I would be probably so much harder on me than the professors even. But so that is the week 1 assignment. And I would love to explain to you what the final project is at the end, but in week 1, I couldn't have explained it to you at all. I had no idea what I was working towards, which is why I felt so confused and I lacked such confidence turning in that week one work. And I mean, I'm not like too full of myself to say that. Like, I mean, everybody feels like most comfortable when they know exactly what's going on, um but like I'm not even gonna pretend like I knew what that was. So for the first discussion board, we had to kind of answer two questions. And the first one was really just asking us our opinion of what we feel like is one of the most pressing policy issues in the field of human sexuality. And I was kind of confused because I was like, didn't we kind of just like speak to that in the week one assignment? And so I just played dumb and I was like, well, obviously, since I wrote about um, school issues twice, then that's what I'm gonna say. And I did. I spoke to the poor quality of sex education in general, but it seems to specifically be occurring in the southern United States. And I also live in the Bible Belt as well as the South, and so that double whammy is definitely obvious. Um, and when I was writing it, um, it just so happened to be the exact same week that someone was coming through our district to our middle school and high school students to have like the sex ed talk with them. And um, in Texas, they are what's considered an opt in state where you have to send permission slips home and parents have to sign it for the kids to go, not for them to be held out, which is something that makes more sense to me. But Texas is considered one of the like abstinence only until marriage promoters. There are different states that like really kind of drive that subject home. Texas is a big promoter of that idea. Um, and so uh, they they subscribe to the opt-in method, and I don't know what the middle school numbers looked like, but there are about 100 kids, give or take, in every grade level, ninth through 12th grade at the high school where my office is. And I am on the high school emails, and I was, I kid you not, I was so shocked to see that only about 25, like a quarter to a third. So sorry, guys. Like I said, the spring is crazy. Back to what I was saying. Um, about a quarter to a third of the students in the high school were all that could end up attending due to this opt-in option. And to me, that seems very ineffective. Um, and so that's a huge detriment and like a huge handicap my state in particular has put on sex education in public schools. So that was really my major policy of concern. Um, and I had to provide a link to support this idea. And so I think, let's see, I will share the link in the description. It's the NCSL, which is the National Conference of State Legislators or Legislation. Um, and on this website, the link specifically that I will share will be the page where you can compare and contrast each state's statutes, laws, and policies on sex education across the 50 states. And it was so cool to be able to like see them one after the other and see which ones were like more holistic and all encompassing, and which ones were really kind of showing their behind and like being back in like left back in the last century. I didn't, and surprisingly, I didn't see any laws or policies that just jumped out as being wildly like woke and leftist, even in some states where I was expecting that. So, at least at the law and policy level, that's not where you see all of this woke language. It tends to be more at the local level, from what I could tell. Um, the second part of the discussion board was that the professor gave us a list of policy toolkits to choose from. I want to say she gave us five. Yeah. Um, and we had to choose a policy toolkit that and we had to review it and the different methods that it talked about. And so then we ultimately had to decide which one appealed to us most and why. Um, and at first glance, like I put off this discussion board for so long because I was like, I'm not interested in law and policy, and you're like forcing my hand. Like I don't want to read five advocacy toolkits. That's because, obviously I'm doing the sex therapy track specifically. Like, I'm not trying to go change laws and policies. That is something that is someone else's passion, and I want to leave to them. Just like how I hope that um, as a sex therapist, like people will leave that realm of sexual health into my professional hands. Um, but I will read you guys the five different policy toolkits real quick. The first one was called Queering RJ, and I cannot for the life of me remember what RJ stands for. But it's an LGBTQ task force, which to me, I'm like, ugh, like it just read like how can we go like make spaces more like woke and LGBT, and no thank you. So I didn't make it past the title of that one. The second one was called Community Action, and it was about sex ed policies, and sex education, sexual health in general. And I was like, oh, I don't want to take community action. Um, that's not what I do. Um, and then because I'm a very I consider myself ultimately, like at the end of the day, a libertarian. Like, your rights and your liberties are yours. Do not infringe upon mine. Like, it's a very live and let live. Like, I can morally and religiously disagree with what you're doing, and I can tell you, and we can have that conversation, but I'm not going to actively keep you from making what I believe is the wrong choice. I'm not going to support it, but because of that, I'm not going to infringe upon my own beliefs and morals and values. But I'm not going to twist the arm of an adult. That is their responsibility. They have to answer for that eventually, sooner or later. Um, and so, I taking community action just doesn't really like go with that whole vibe that I've got. Um, then the third option was an anti-violence LGBT advocacy, and like I'm all about anti-violence, but like it's specific. Like, I didn't want to open up that advocacy toolkit and it be all about like from like actual violence, because there are people who are having violence committed against them because of their gender identity and sexual attraction and all that. And while I don't agree with that stuff, I don't think it's appropriate to commit violence against someone for those things. That's absolutely not okay. Um, I did not want to open it and see like microaggressions, um, because sometimes woke people can turn differences of opinion, um, or preferences into microaggressions and like things to be a Karen about. And I wasn't trying to rock my boat, especially not week one when I didn't know what I was doing. Um, the fourth one was about judicial bias, and I didn't want to hear any kind of victimization. Not into it. And then the fifth one was called Reparations Now, and as a conservative by nature, like conservatives in general do not agree with the idea of reparations, and I am part of that crew. And so I was like, yeah, no, I don't need to open that one. It's not for me. So, although I hated the idea of looking through a policy toolkit, I eventually chose the community action, sexual education, and sexual health. Um, and it ended up being a lot cooler than I expected. I was very pleasantly surprised once I opened it up and got into it. It talked about how to like set up and promote and speak to school boards and churches and religious leaders and in community spaces. Like it literally spelled everything out. You could have absolutely no background or no familiarity in any of these spaces, and it basically is a roadmap for that. And I thought that was so great because there are people who are big idea people who are really passionate about this but have like no idea what to, like, how to channel their passion and their ideas into a plan of action. um, but I will say it, like, as much as I appreciated it, it made me a little nervous thinking like, oh my gosh, this, like, I can only imagine that these other policy toolkits and like how to make actual changes and affect policy choices, I bet that is just as nicely lined out in these other policy toolkits. And these things that I don't agree with or support, like, somebody else could be getting a roadmap right now about things that I don't agree with. And so I didn't love that idea. Um, but I will also share the link for the policy toolkit because that was really great. Um, and the when it said what single policy advocacy tool most appeals to you, like, I wasn't sure because it's called a toolkit as a whole document. And so I was like, how small of a piece am I trying to single out? Um, and I wasn't really sure about the answer. Um, so that's another reason why I waited to do my discussion board for so long. I really, my ADHD was like out and about this week. I waited until the 11 o'clock hour to answer these this week because I needed to see how my peers were interpreting it to figure out how I should be interpreting it. Um, but then, my good writing brain like spat it out in 20 minutes. Um, but so ultimately, the piece that I said most appealed to me was the one talking about working with school boards to adjust, approve, and put into place comprehensive sex education that worked with the state's laws and guidelines. And really, just because, although I'm a therapist, I was previously a teacher, and so I'm very familiar and comfortable with the school environment. That's like a school board, and the idea of speaking at a school board is not intimidating to me, especially in the small districts that I work in, because I have very likely seen those faces out and about. And the superintendent isn't like this man in the high tower who doesn't know my name, at least in passing. Um, I don't chat him up all the time, but he at least calls me by name when we pass each other. Um, and so that to me felt like an easier thing to accomplish. And so it was easier for me to understand that piece of the roadmap. And it was something I felt like I could most practically accomplish. My husband is also a teacher and does some like assistant principal duties, and my mother is an elementary school principal. And I feel like if I ever ran into a hard place where I wasn't sure what to do, that I would also have really readily available resources in those two, and we could kind of problem solve and work out the kinks easier than if I tried to, reach out to a church or like put together a community event or something of that nature. Not that I wouldn't, obviously. Realistically speaking, I am probably much more likely to put like a church program into action, or a more like community school, like meetup type of event for like special needs teens and their parents to come together for, because um, kids in special education with higher support needs that are probably in that self contained setting need to probably have their parents present for this kind of topic, just so that the parents can help reiterate the concepts and the parents are in the room hearing what we're telling kids. And and because little kids are known for like coming home from school, or even going to school from home, and telling these wild stories that make parents or teachers like try to get on the phone with each other and be like, hey, so I heard the strangest thing, or your kid drew the weirdest picture. Um, it reminds me of a video I saw on the internet of a kid drew a picture for like what happened on a snow day when they had a bad weather day and they missed school. The teacher had them come home and like, or come from home the next day when they got back to school, and draw what they were up to. And this kid shared with the teacher, because she asked for an explanation when she saw the picture. She was like, what is happening here? Um, and the kid was saying, oh, all these men were trying to give my mom money at work. And in the picture looked like all of these men standing around his mom, who was holding something that was a line with a square, and she looked like she was standing on the square. So it looked like the mom was like it very obviously looked like she was like pole dancing, and these men had money that they were like trying to throw at her. And so the teacher conferenced with the mom, and the mom was mortified. She was like, I am a general manager at like a Lowe's or a Home Depot. And she was like, and we only had one snow shovel left, and all of these men started a bidding war and were trying to outbid for the last shovel, and they were like dang near causing a fight, and I like had to hold the shovel like away from them to keep them from having a fist fight. And it was so innocently mistaken, just because like the kid didn't understand the concepts of like, and like the social context of like what that would look like. And I feel like sometimes working in special education is like that, because I was a sped teacher and now I'm a sped counselor. And so sometimes when sped kids say really out of pocket things, instead of immediately reacting, I have to go, can you tell me more about that? Or like, oh goodness, I've never heard of something like that. What on earth is that? I would love for you to teach me. And then when you ask those like whys or tell me mores, like kids, like it will eventually come out what they meant, even if those are not the correct words that they needed to put together. And I feel like parents of sped kids don't naturally always understand that, and teachers don't always think to explicitly lay out what they're saying. And I definitely don't think presenters that like these small communities have come in to give like the sex education talk, they definitely don't have that special education mind of like, let me be like as explicitly like explicit in my detail as possible while still being appropriate. You know, you can't just say, oh, go take your paper to the back. I remember as a sped teacher, I would have to tell my kids, the first person in the row, go grab the textbook for every person in your row. Once you get your textbook, tear out page 47, 48, and 49. And then close your textbook, pass it to the first person. I will come around to staple, so make sure they are in order. Like I spelled out every single step. And every once in a while, a kid would try to like be cute and like not follow instructions. And I would be like, repeat them back to me. Go ahead. How did you misinterpret what I said, friend? And they would be like, and I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you so much. But you know, the more adults you kind of add to a sped kid's life and teaching and experiences, the more the likelihood for misinterpretation goes up, because people don't have the same communication styles. And when you add a different communication style on top of a person who you already don't know and aren't familiar with, then I mean, I can only imagine what kids would come home and say without their parents being present for that conversation to say, no, that's not what she said. This is actually what she said. And when she said this, this is what she meant. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, you're right. And it's as easy of a fix as that compared to this lady came to school today and she was talking about me having sex with Susie. And she was teaching me how to have sex with Susie. What? No. When in reality, the presenter may have just come in and taught them like the actual like activities that involved sex, but they like Susie and they have a crush on Susie. And so because this was the first person teaching them about how to actually commit the act of sex, and they like Susie, they put all those pieces together inside their head and then went home and told their mom. Because you just never know what's going on in a sped kid's mind until they spit it right out. And normally they'll spit it out without thinking about any of the consequences, which keeps it interesting for sure. Okay, in week 2, we will tackle kind of those next steps of the assignment. I will say every assignment leads up to the final project. And once I figure out what this final project is, I will tell you, I promise. But I do know that week 2, the topic is sex education, pregnancy and parenting, and gender affirming care. So I feel like I'm going to have to do a lot more ducking and dodging in this class than I did in the last class to stay within my own personal boundaries. Um, anyway, until then, uh, I'm Keaton Wyndham. This was Raw Reflections, and I will see you next time for week 2 of my law and policy class. Later.